us here today. In a couple minutes, I'll hand it off to B. Hansen, who's our Director of Office of Victim Services, who will help guide the conversation. But this is about listening for me. I know there's been a lot of stress out there in our communities about the impact of what happens when a domestic violence case is brought and its likelihood of success versus dismissal in light of changes that happened that were well-intended and important to do, but now need some refinement in our discovery laws. And so this conversation will help shape some of that conversation as we head into our budget negotiations. But I think many of you know this is a personal issue for me. My mother had to endure seeing, what happened to her own mother before her father walked out. But it was a very angry, violent childhood, and more emotional abuse than physical, but it took its toll on my mother as a little girl who watched her own mother suffer at the hands of a man who was supposed to love her, breaking down the compact that you have between a married couple of trust and love, and it was just non-existent for my mother's childhood. So that really steeled her with the knowledge I have to do something about this. Other children may end up seeking out people who are equally abusive. There's a history of this. When children see a way of behavior, they think that that is the norm. My mother broke out of that with her strength and courage and became a champion for victims of domestic violence, helping found the very first office and coalition for victims of domestic violence back in Buffalo, helping found Haven House, along with a lot of others, who created the first shelter for victims of domestic violence, and then founded her own with my family years later. So this is a personal journey to me, but also my mother spent a lot of time in court with victims. And I saw through her eyes what it takes for someone to have the courage to stand up and to accuse someone who perhaps committed to love them in marriage or in a relationship. Have to say to them, I'm going to stand up against you and make sure that there are consequences. That takes an extraordinary amount of courage. And when they get to that point and are willing to put themselves out there in such a profound way, danger to themselves, and then to see a result that they just walk out of the courtroom in disbelief and say, how could this have happened? We need to deal with that. And I know you have so many thoughts on this, and I do want to thank all of you for joining here. B can start us off, and then as we go around here, your comments will allow you to introduce yourselves too. But we also have Mary Pat Donnelly is our incoming president-elect of the New York State District Attorneys Association. Mike McMahon is the current right now, but incoming. That's really important to hear her voice as well. So B. Hansen, our director, thank you for hosting us here today and leading this conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Governor Hochul. You have just such a deep commitment to domestic violence and reducing crime across the great state of New York. So thank you for your leadership. I know you recognize that crime has a lasting impact on victims and their families, and that's really why we are here today. We're here as survivors of violence, prosecutors and service providers who see that lasting impact of domestic violence each and every day. And we know that the effects of violence are intergenerational, and they can really lead to years of trauma that impacts people's health, their jobs, their relationships, and their children. As the governor, you've invested in model interventions that are giving communities new tools to help them improve public safety, and this is very revolutionary, I think, in terms of having these additional tools and respond more effectively to domestic violence. You've also provided record levels of funding to support victims of crime, and OVS has been a critical part of that support system, and I know that the more than 200 victim service providers that we fund, from law enforcement, prosecutors' offices, and community-based organizations across the state really appreciate the funding that we've been able to provide. These programs provide services that meet the specific needs of victims, where they live, and OVS also provides compensation to victims to help them get the support and services that they need to heal without having to pay for it themselves. And thanks to the governor's office and her visionary leadership, we've been able to allocate the largest amount of funding ever for our OVS funding. So our new three-year grant cycle that starts October 1st will have the largest amount of funding we've ever had before. So we're very excited about that. And today's roundtable, it's really an extension of that commitment to public safety, and I'm really glad that all of you are here today. Our goal is really to ensure that the criminal justice system is fair to all parties and it does so in a way that preserves the safety to survivors of domestic violence. So very excited to be here with all of you. I wanted to pass it over to District Attorney Donnelly for a few words as well. Thank you.
I'll just reiterate, thank you, Governor, for investing in domestic violence as a component of public safety. As a prosecutor, we recognize the unique challenges, obviously, that go into a domestic violence prosecution. But it's not just getting a victim to feel comfortable cooperating with a prosecutor. We need to make sure that we have the big picture in a lot of these victims that we see, unfortunately, with different abusers as time goes forward. And again, the intergenerational is something that we can definitely see in Rensselaer County. So the ability to have a multidisciplinary approach, the ability to have someone to support the prosecutor to say, we understand your financial burdens. We understand your child care burdens. We understand everything that goes into walking away from a dangerous, potentially deadly relationship. So the funding that you're providing to our offices is going to make such a difference in allowing us to focus on doing our jobs, evidence-based prosecution, and making sure we have success so that these victims know New York cares about them and is going to shuttle them through this terrible time in their life. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to B.
Thanks. Okay. I'll just wait a couple minutes till press leaves and then we'll get started.
I think we can get started.
Yeah, I think it's started. Okay. So I know we've got a short window here, a short window of time. We've all talked. I've talked to each of you. I think we'll try to make conversation brief but focused on
this. We just finished a very meaningful, impactful conversation with the people whose lives are so intertwined with our victims of domestic violence. I'm referring to our district attorneys, and I want to thank District Attorney and incoming President of DASNY, the statewide association, Rensselaer County District Attorney Mary Pat Donnelly has joined us, the District Attorney from Westchester County, Susan Casasis, and also right here in Albany, District Attorney Lee Kinlan, as well as the advocates and B. Hansen, who runs our Office of Victim Services. These are tough conversations to have. Anyone who knows a victim or themselves are a victim because of something that happened to their family member, or someone who sat there and held the hands of victims as they came into the district attorney's office, only to have to tell them later that, I'm sorry, your case has been dismissed on a technicality, and have to really deal with the emotional trauma where someone is yet victimized not once but twice. So all of them have lived this, and I wanted to reach out to them as we're having conversations, important conversations about how we can talk about. In the past, there was a great need to change the laws that were definitely skewed toward the prosecutors back in 2019. The pendulum was way over here. But now we've seen in practicality, the pendulum has swung way over here, where there are so many cases that are now being dismissed, and especially in the area of domestic violence. And as I mentioned, this is particularly cruel. I think back to my mother's own story, what she witnessed as a child and carried that trauma with her entire life, but she decided to use that pain and harness it to alleviate the pain of others. And that stuck with me. That became my family's life journey as well, as we tried to reach out. And I can't tell you how many times I would help victims or watch their children when they were heading into court with my mother, literally holding their hand to give them courage to stand up to someone who at one time perhaps pledged love and devotion to them, who now became their tormentor, trapping them in their home, a place intended for refuge and compassion that became sometimes a torture chamber. That's what is going on in our state. And we can no longer turn a blind eye to their cries for help. And when they finally take that step and say, I'm going to get help, I'm not going to let my children live a life of seeing this hatred and this pain and violence, I'm going to take them out of it. That is a courageous, courageous step that many cannot take financially or emotionally, but those who do, who come forward to tell their stories to the police and to district attorneys who want nothing more than to bring them justice and have them find out, because of the law that was changed, where the standard is now so low for a case to be thrown out, literally on technicalities, and that's all we're talking about. To see the statistics of how many cases, and also domestic violence convictions going from 31%, which is still not very high, down to 6% as a result. Once this gets out there, who is going to step forward and say, I'm going to put myself through this pain and bring this case? You know who gets away with it then? The perpetrators, the violent offenders. And that is wrong. That is why we're taking these steps here and having important conversations in these halls as we speak. And their voices are so important to me, and I'm grateful to them for being part of this journey, one that should not be difficult to decide who we're standing with. Again, we'll always make sure that defendants get all the rights they're entitled to under our system. It's a founding premise of our democracy and our Constitution. We believe in that. But why not have people stand up for the victims as well? That's all we're trying to do here. And the choice between fair and speedy trials, which are important objectives, but also letting dangerous abusers off the hook, is a false choice. That is what is being portrayed here. We can and must do both. And I will simply hearken back to the 2019 reforms. We did not make those historic changes in order to let abusers walk free. But that, my friends, is exactly what is happening. So we have legislation that, specifically when it comes to victims of domestic violence, expanding the scope of automatic redaction, changing the timing requirements, but also just understanding these are human beings. These are people whose cries for help have led them out of their home into a public space. subjected to ridicule and abuse from the abuser, even in a courtroom. But when they're willing to do that, and we turn our backs on them, then we must look at ourselves and say, is this a society that we want to have to continue here in the state of New York? I say no, and that's why I'm fighting very hard to make these necessary changes. Happy to take any questions from myself or our district attorneys here, or advocates who will be happy to answer as well. Yes.
Hold on.
He will
We're
call.
doing on topic first about discovery, reform, and domestic violence.
Yes,
You fit the bill? Go ahead, Rob.
Governor, there was are we referring to what is known as 30-30 dismissals, quote unquote, speedy trial dismissals, where there's been I don't say failure, but there's been an absence of a prosecutor's certifying or whatever. And what is it specifically? If you're going to talk to just people to get them understand what some of these specifics mean, like what are you talking about actually changing from? Like what's actually going to change that will make these fewer cases actually being dismissed?
Giving discretion for judges to look at the evidence. Is it related or is it relevant? Instead of saying anything, and I look at a different case, it was not a DV case, but just happened, and it blared in the news of New York City, in Manhattan not long ago. 70 pieces of compelling evidence that demonstrated an individual abused a woman, tormented her in front of people on the streets of New York, and should have been convicted for that. The evidence was overwhelming. But some last piece of evidence related to, absolutely unrelated, I should say, absolutely unrelated to the case, some behavior report on a police officer related to him being punished for letting someone get a drink of water. I mean, that's how absurd this has become. So we're talking about letting there be more understanding and conversation and not an automatic dismissal because one little piece of evidence showed up later, that a judge can look at the body of the evidence and not have it be an automatic dismissal, and look at that 30-day clock and say, is this relevant? Is it prejudicial? Or is this something that is going to be helping the case? Is it hurting the case? Let there be a lot of something called common sense in this system. We don't see a whole lot of that here, and that's all I'm trying to institute.
Jack?
NAACP says that your proposal will swing the pendulum too far and result in more wrongful convictions. What do you make of that, and how long are you willing to hold up the budget to get this right?
Well, I'm not disclosing how long I'm willing to hold up a budget on anything. I don't think that'd be smart as a negotiating tactic. We also have entities like National Action Network. Reverend Al Sharpton has spoken up clearly in defense of what we are doing, promoting what we are doing to make these changes, because we also have to listen to the victims. We are listening to the NAACP. We do not want the pendulum to swing back to where it was. I say that those changes were necessary, many of them, absolutely necessary. And we're not going to throw all those out. But let's look at now the application. Is this what we really intended? Is this what you legislators intended when you put this in place? To have all these domestic violence cases thrown out? These are your constituents. That's the argument we're making. We can make some changes here, inject common sense. Is this important information related to the case? Is it related? Is it relevant? Or is it just absolutely unrelated and should not even be a factor in dismissal? So we'll work with them. We are trying to say we are not going to the other direction, swinging the other way. We are absolutely not doing that. We're going to get
alternatives like Senator Miley's bill.
I'm very happy with the plan I have.
Anything else on topic? Vaughn?
I know you touched on one specific example of this. I don't know if anybody else can share any examples of situations like the one you're.
Well, just who was the one telling us about the case? You come on up and tell
Oh,
us.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, it just happened.
Hi, I'm with the Westchester County District Attorney's Office, and I was just sharing with the governor a very recent case that I had as a prosecutor. I'm the chief of the Domestic Violence Bureau, and I had to have a very heartbreaking conversation with the mother of a victim who was a college student who literally, by happenstance on the eve of trial, found a voicemail that directly related to the aggravated harassment charge. It was a trial. She was very happy. She just found it. She didn't think she had it. We got it. We turned it over immediately upon receipt, and the defense filed a 30-30 motion, and the judge dismissed the entire case based on that little technicality. It's very heartbreaking because that victim lost an order of protection. She lost her faith in the criminal justice system, and she is exactly who is in need of this type of discovery reform, because when you have these conversations with the real victims and to explain to them that it's a technicality and they no longer have protection and they're back in danger, it's a very hard job to do. And so we're thankful that, Governor, you're doing everything you can to get the pendulum swinging in the right direction.
Thank you.
Can you say your name and spell it for the cameras?
Yes, Joyce Miller with the District Attorney's Office of Westchester County, Joyce Miller. Thank you.
Anything else on topic? All right, at this point, I'd like to thank our advocates and law
Thank you, everybody.
enforcement
Really
leaders.
appreciate
And we'll
it.
take a couple off.
They're important. Start. All right. Are these pressed in the front row? Nope. Then they should go. Let the press sit down, yeah. A crystal ball that tells us the scale of cuts, if any. Even Department of Education. I was trying to follow the president's press conference when he started naming different counties and how happy they're going to be. I don't know whether that meant he's going to give us the $5 or $6 billion we receive now in a block grant for us to allocate, so I can still put $2 billion toward Pell Grants, I can still put $2 billion toward school lunches, I can still fund programs for disability. I don't know that right now, and we're not going to know for quite a while. What we always have the opportunity to do is deal with the budget with the facts we have in front of us, but nothing prohibits us from coming back in a special session to deal with anything that comes our way from the federal government. But we're having conversations about, what cuts in education would do, what cuts in Medicaid would do, and also one is always optimistic that the 7 Republicans who claim to represent the state of New York in Congress, if people are vocal and get them to be more persuasive, if they banded together, they could stop a lot of this. You think about the House of Representatives, how close those votes are. If 7 New York members of Congress stood up and says, I don't want Medicaid cuts, I don't want this Social Security office cut in White Plains because seniors are going to have to travel dozens and dozens of miles. So we also have a responsibility to put them on the spot and say, what are you doing to make sure that your home state of New York is not hurt? But we always can come back and have another session if we need to.
Do you think it's wise maybe to be trying to put more money in an unallocated fund? Or I guess it's just when the cuts are so clearly coming, I appreciate the idea that you could come back, but you guys are hurtling forward with something.
I've said since day one, $93 billion will not be made up by the state of New York. It will not be made up by any state. And that is just unrealistic to think that'll be the case. It's not going to happen. We have said that over and over.
Nick?
To that point about a potential special session, were to come to something like that, is it possible that portions of the budget remain unresolved until, say, the summertime or something along those lines?
No.
And to follow up on that, you mentioned House Republicans would you potentially be in favor of just kind of displaying to New Yorkers, here are the effects of these federal cuts on state spending? I mean, is that?
No, we already are. I've done a number of press events. I was at a hospital at St. Mary's with Congressman Meeks and Grace Lee when they first started talking about the Medicaid cuts and how devastating it'd be for a place that is often the last place any child goes to who's terribly ill. These are complex cases, and a lot of these kids are not going home. I stood there and says, can you imagine a member of Congress coming here and looking in the eyes of these children and their parents and saying, I'm going to Washington to cut Medicaid, which is what keeps your child alive? I will continue raising my voice loudly about the impact of cuts on families and on seniors, and we just spoke about it when I was at a school here in Albany, Friday, I think it was, talking about what it would mean if there were cuts in school nutrition programs and school lunch programs. A lot of these kids are going to have their stomachs growling throughout the day if they don't have that money. So I will always be the voice explaining to the residents of New York the impact of these changes, but given the dynamics in Washington, the power that 7 members of the majority party from our home state have cannot be underestimated, and they need to be called out to use their voices.
Caitlin?
Governor, on CDPAP, I know last night the DOH said that they're implementing a grace period, but the transition is still not going to be delayed. There are concerns. The FPI, the Fiscal Policy Institute, put out a report regarding concerns about the insurance that will be provided through PPL, and then there's concerns about navigating the system from consumers and saying that's not enough time, or that this being paid retroactively is they don't believe that will be enough. So what do you say to all of the concerns that have been kind of swirling about this, and that are saying that what you guys announced last night is not enough?
Well, Dr. McDonald is having a press briefing later this afternoon to explain more, but I will say this. Contrary to erroneous reporting, we are not changing that deadline for the companies. They don't deserve it because they are the reason we're in this situation. They have been digging their heels in, refusing to turn over legally obligated information about who the patients are and who the caregivers are. I'm not letting them off the hook. Hell no. They're the ones who causes a $10 million campaign of disinformation, trying to persuade people that they're not going to get the services they're used to, they're not going to get their caregiver, and they're going to end up in a nursing home, was flat out lies that should have been called out by the press every day of the week. But now everybody's starting to see, oh, that had an effect. They convinced people that this is happening, when in fact we've had the truth on our side all along. We have called it out. Dr. McDonald's voice has been out there. But I'm not going to clean up the mess of these companies and give them a grace period. They don't get a day. Who we will help, who I've always cared about, my number one priority, are the patients and their caregivers. And so be aware, friends in the media, that there's going to be a lot more efforts from people who have a strong financial interest in misleading you and the public, because there's a reason this went from a $2.5 billion program just a few years ago to a $9 billion program, one of the biggest abuses of Medicaid we've seen in our country. I'm the only one who had the courage to stand up and say no more. Clearly, there's a lot of people unhappy because you know where that money was going? A lot of it was in their pockets. So they have a strong financial reason to continue the misleading and the disinformation campaigns, and I'm going to stand up to that. So we are getting this right. We encourage more people to tune out the people who are lying to you, and it's hard, and listen to us, because we're going to make sure you have the caregiver you want that was never in question.
We have time for about 2 more. Dan?
In regards to the insurance, though, are you
Dr.
open
McDonald.
$11.99?
He'll go over those details this afternoon, yeah.
On the state budget, over the next week, I'm curious, Governor, as you're negotiating with the legislative leaders, what do you see as the top 1 or 2 things that you think are going to be most difficult to negotiate, where you might be farthest apart or just most difficult? And are you comfortable going past April 1st as we have in the past?
I've never done that before. I was joking, okay? You guys, so cynical. Anybody see Shucks, the play? All right, you need to get down to Schenectady. Go for a laugh once in a while, lighten up. It's good therapy. I'm not aiming for a late budget. We always strive for on-time budget. I've been trying to drive the conversations countless hours over the last week the weekend, today, tonight. So we are in, overdrive in terms of trying to push this forward. The challenge is that the leaders take everything we've talked about. They now have to go back to their conferences. That's just the natural state of play. And then they'll bring back what the conferences say about what we thought we were getting close on, and then they'll end up in this direction. And then we're going to get back together, we're going to go back in this direction again. So that's just the rhythm of it. It doesn't mean things aren't going to happen. Watch the history of a lot of my initiatives in the past that were declared dead on arrival by people here, people in the press, and look at the ones that got through. So I don't stop negotiating at any point. We'll get it done. And the priorities I think you've seen outlined were my top priorities legislatively, which cell phones, no brainer, everybody, should not be complicated. Our discovery changes, which you heard here, are so important. Something that about 80% of the public wants, which is a change in our mental health laws that allow us to take care of people who are sick instead of leaving them on the streets, which is cruel. And we're going to look at, a plan to try to get through a masked intimidation offense, where people that are using masks to intimidate others is not allowed. So those are areas that I've identified in the budget as priorities, but we have, I'd say those are tier one. Got about 150 in tier two, but a lot of these also can break loose and be dealt with in the legislative session. Not my top four, but the other ones.
All right, we got last one. Which one of you raised your hand first?
I did.
All right, we'll take two. Jimmy, you can
That's
start.
easy for you to say.
Sorry.
I thought I was getting out of here with just one of these characters. Okay.
Governor, I'm just wondering, right now, do I intend to harass you?
We also have exceptions for medical reasons.
For medical reason. Do I intend to harass you?
Yes.
Okay. How would you know that, and how would a law
Because-
enforcement officer know that?
There's a way to define this that'll be worked on in the legislation if this goes forward for this language. But medical and religious reasons, are you telling me you're not wearing it for medical reason? Why are you wearing it, Jimmy? We're not wearing it for a medical reason.
I'd rather not say why I'm wearing
Okay, I don't know the answer whether they're using it for a medical reason or not, based on what you're saying.
But you're backing a proposal that would make it an arrestable offense if my intent was to harass.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, how would you discern my intent? Or how would one
We'll have
discern my
criteria.
intent?
All legislation has criteria that clearly spells out what must be factored in determining whether an offense. It's not going to be broad-based. It's not just going to be one sentence. It'll clearly be defined in the legislation. That's how legislation happens. You have to give clear criteria so anyone knows what the expectations are.
Backing up on the masks, why haven't you been out pushing for this publicly, like cell phones, like the discovery changes and the other parts of the budget that you want?
I have talked about it since last June, which is earlier that I started talking about some of these other initiatives, so I have. Whether or not the press covers it is up to the press.
It wasn't in your executive budget.
No, this is one I decided to wait.
Why? And
I
what
have
initiatives?
different strategies. You can look at past years on other issues that have come up later and have been successful. So,
Any relation to your conversation with the president?
oh no, that didn't come up. I didn't talk about masks with him, unless they're telling you I did, but if they're telling you that, that's not true.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Chuck is actually our leader of possible.